Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be here with all of you. Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction, Mary Joy. I really appreciate that. It's such a beautiful day. I hope you're having a beautiful day wherever you are as well. And thank you for taking time out of your day to attend this water cooler chat. So, as Mary Joy said, I am an associate professor and director of environmental studies at Misericordia University, which is in northeastern Pennsylvania. We're a small liberal arts institution. And I'll kind of join in with the classes that I teach as well. Specifically, I teach an intro level, intro bio courses to both majors and non majors. Specifically, I teach one in genetics, evolution, and ecology, is what it's called. I also teach upper level electives in ecology, marine biology, and invertebrate zoology, as well as invasive species. I also teach biostats, intro to GIS, as well as a handful of environmental studies courses. So I've been teaching, if you count graduate school, about 21 years now. I've been at Misericordia. This is my sixth year. And then before this, I taught at St. Lawrence University up in upstate New York, and then Siena College, also in upstate New York, outside of Albany. I really am excited to talk to you guys today about teaching art to undergraduates. It's something that I kind of stumbled into, as I'm sure many of us have. I'm not somebody who was trained in R as a graduate student. I learned MATLAB as a graduate student, as an oceanography graduate student, and then when I was done being an oceanography graduate student, I no longer had the license to MATLAB. And then someone told me about R and said, you should consider R. It's open source, it's free, you can do a lot with it. And then I kind of put that idea on the shelf for a little while and didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it until I taught at St. Lawrence University and met with my colleague Erica Barthelmess, who showed me how awesome R could be. She's also an ecologist, and we started an R users group that for faculty, staff, and students there. And that's when I started using it. And then I realized, wow, my students could really benefit from this. So Erica and I both taught upper level ecology courses, and we decided, hey, let's kind of compare notes on how we're doing this. And so out of that came a publication in 2020. I'll have a link to that, and I think that's in one of the resources that Mary Joy posted, so that one of the papers, as well as supplementary material to those papers. And then I started, really using it, and I designed a biostats course here at Misericordia. I use it in my general ecology class here, and all of my not invertebrate, excuse me, all of my independent, there we go, all of my independent research students use R as well. So now that you kind of had an introduction, this is what I'm going to talk about today. I want to leave lots of time for the discussion at the end. So I might go over things a little bit more quickly, but if there's anything you want me to follow up on or discuss, I'd be happy to do. But I'm going to give you a brief introduction to kind of where I teach R, why I teach R, some examples of how I've done it. And I'm going to give you kind of two main examples, but the supplemental materials give you specifics, and you are more than welcome to use any of those ideas in the supplemental materials, adapt them for your own use. If you ever have questions about anything in there, or want to pick my brain, I'm more than happy to discuss this stuff. I have become an R nerd, and I'm really enjoying, talking about it with others. So happy to share ideas. I'm happy to learn things from others as well. If you have some great ideas, please share them during the Q&A. I'll talk about some of the lessons I've learned personally, some of the ones that Eric and I kind of figured out together, and then I'll open up for discussion. So courses that I've taught in which we use R a lot are all tend to be upper level courses. I saw in the chat a few folks who were like, I kind of curious how to teach it to intro level. I haven't done that, but maybe someone else in this chat has, and I think that might be a good area for discussion. Um, so I teach biostats, in which we primarily use our general ecology and pretty much any other like upper level ecology course, like community ecology, uses R. And any student who does independent research with me learns R. The only exception would be if they're already doing like GIS and they're learning like QGIS and ArcGIS and stuff. So they may not use R, but some of them still might. But they know from day one, like I tell them, you're going to be using R. So before I kind of jump into the specifics here, I know these are also in the chat, but if you want, here's some QR codes that have the two publications that you might be interested in. The first one is the one I mentioned with Dr. Barthelmess, Teaching R in the Undergraduate Ecology Classroom. And this was published in 2020 in Ecosphere. This is the one where essentially we compare notes about what we did. She taught an upper level forest ecology class that had a lab component. I taught an upper level community ecology class that didn't have a lab component. And we both taught R to our students, but we kind of did it in different ways. So that paper kind of highlights what we did, how we approached it, and some of the major lessons that we learned that we hope others can benefit from. And that also contains lots of supplementary materials as well, including some of our course schedules, which logistically might be very helpful. The other paper comes out of an ESA faculty mentoring network centered on 4DEE, so yay 4DEE. It was led by Christopher Beck, and the goal of this faculty mentoring network was to take some of the figure sets that were already published in the Teaching Issues and Experiments in Ecology journal and kind of rewrite them so they're more closely aligned to the 4DEE curriculum. And then some of us also wrote an additional paper as kind of an extension, like another exercise, in addition to those updated figure sets. And that's what this one is, this Auker 2023, is using R to apply a Lac-Voltaire predator-prey model to assess the effectiveness of a biocontrol for diamondback moths. So essentially describes how you can, it has an exercise in there for students to utilize R to kind of play with parameters within Lac-Voltaire model. And it's geared towards students who have very little experience with programming. So it's kind of written in a way to kind of help them understand the modeling without having to do it from scratch. So feel free to check that out. The full exercise is in that document. So why teach students R? And it seems like most of you, just by kind of skimming the chat, are either very well seasoned in teaching R or want to learn how to do it. Maybe some are on the fence. I also know that some of my colleagues prefer Python, and that's perfectly cool. I actually really like Python as well. I don't teach it yet, but because I primarily do a lot of statistical analyses, especially when working with students and visualizations. And then Python I use more for automation and when we're doing GIS stuff. So maybe down the road I'll also teach Python, but there's kind of three areas that kind of highlight why I teach R. And so I'm going to go over them and they're kind of highlighted here, but the first thing is it forces me personally to really spend time teaching students how to think about their data rather than kind of rushing in and throwing everything onto a spreadsheet, which is, I think, what I probably used to do. It's like, okay, make a graph, do a t-test, whatever. Now it's like, okay, let's look at the data. What format does it need to be in? All right, and I'll talk more about this in the next slide. Teaching R also helps align my ecology courses more with the 4D framework. And one thing that we found in the Auker and Barthelmess paper is that the job market and expectations for knowing R are increasing over time. So students who leave as undergraduates with some experience in R will have an additional benefit, right? An additional skill in their toolbox. So it'll make them a little bit more marketable as candidates. So thinking about data, you know, when I teach students R, the one thing, like I just said, it really helps me slow down in the process instead of jumping right into the deep end, just making them think about their data a little bit more critically. I think it helped my improve my teaching in that way. So the students have to think about what format do the data need to be in? What variables are being collected? Which one's independent? Which one's dependent variables? What type of data are they? You know, things they may not have had to really think about before because they have to know what, use the right test, use the right package, use the right function in R for a specific data type. They also may need to transform or clean their data. So my students learn how to use dplyr and other tools to kind of transform their data, to maybe change the format from character to numerical or what have you. Think about what tests is required, what package do they need, what's the best way to visualize their data. We use ggplot in my classes. They learn some labeling, how to label their graphs appropriately. Do they need error bars? It really kind of slows them down. It makes them think about this. And then, probably most importantly, R helps make, at least from my experience, data analysis much more reproducible. I use R notebooks. So students, when they're done with an assignment, they have a full record of every step that they took, with notes, notations, comments, everything, so that they can go back and look at it later on. So they know exactly what they did. I know what they did. And so it's very clear where, if there were any issues, where those issues are. Now, for DEE, for those who may not be familiar with it, I imagine many of you are if you're here for this particular water cooler chat, but just in case, and I know Mary Joy posted a link to 4DE resources, but here's a QR code that goes to the site as well. 4DE stands for 4 dimensions of ecology education, and those are ecology concepts, ecology practices, human environment interactions, and cross-cutting themes. So within ecology practices, there's really like these 2 bullet points that apply directly to teaching R. And those are quantitative reasoning and computational thinking, as well as data analysis and interpretation. So by teaching R, you're kind of checking off these particular, these boxes to help students have a more well-rounded ecology education. So the last thing I wanted to share with you, this is right from that Auker and Barthelmess 2020 paper. We went through the Ecolog mailing list for about 10 years, 2008 to 2018. And we looked at all the different jobs that required R. And we realized, that's only been increasing. And one thing I noticed, I went on the job market after grad school in 2010. And, knowing how to do numerical modeling, statistics, and using R was such an important skill for the job market during that time. And I think still now, right? But it just seems to be such an important skill that we really need to be including it in our undergraduate um, education, right? Especially for ecologists. So, all right. So I'm going to give you guys probably what you're waiting for is like, how do I do this? Okay, so I have to do this. How do I do this, right? So I know in the chat we've seen the supplementary materials. So what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to go through all the specifics in those materials. You're welcome to look at them. I'm just going to kind of give you an overview of kind of 2 different approaches that I take. And then I'm going to talk about some of the lessons I learned from it. And I just happened to glance down at the chat, and this comment by Rebecca about R is basically teaching a language, and you're 100% correct. So I'm gonna actually talk about that in a moment. But the way that if you look at that article, that's great, Auker and Barthelmess paper, you will see that she and I approach teaching R in ecology two different ways, right? But even with one instructor, you might approach teaching R in different ways in different classes, depending on what you want your students to leave that class knowing. So I'm going to talk about biostats, and I'm going to talk about ecology, and I'm going to kind of talk about how they're similar, how they're different in how I approach teaching R. So biostats, my biostats course is essentially a deep dive into using R to understand, applied biostatistical problems, right? So this course at Misericordia is an elective for statistics, biology, and environmental studies majors. So it does require basic stats as a prereq. Now, the thing is here, basic stats is taught by several different instructors, as it might be at your institution, and it kind of varies with how much those instructors utilize R in their course. It's essentially up to the instructor, like exactly what they want to focus on, as long as they focus on the basic concepts and statistics. So some of them use R more than others. So my students, when they come into biostats, I kind of assume that they really didn't remember anything from stats, or that they really have no experience in it, unless they're stats majors. Then they might have more experience in it. Even then, some of them may have more experience with, say, like Python than they do R. So the way I do my biostats class, I usually teach it on a Tuesday, Thursday schedule. So I take one day a week and I say, we're going to learn, logistic regression. What is it? Why would you need it? Here's how you would apply it. And then the following Thursday, we do kind of a lab, right? Where they work with in the sample R notebook document that I've given them that has code, has a sample data set that they're going to walk through. And then the assignment for that week, I give them a brand new data set, right? One that may even need to be cleaned up or what have you. And kind of a blank R notebook, and they have to analyze that data set using the skills they learned from the practice. So each week they're kind of building on, okay, this is why I need this test. This is how I'm going to clean up these data, et cetera. By the end of the semester, for this course, I had the students do kind of a final project. The last time I taught this course, they did a poster for our university kind of poster research day, and they chose a data set of their choice, either from the literature on a topic that they're interested in, or some of the students in this class are doing independent research. And I said, use your data from your research that you collected. And they need to figure out how they're going to analyze the data, what the question, well, first, what is their question, how to analyze the data, what tests are they going to use. The poster kind of highlights the code that they use, their visualization, and kind of their thought process. So they have to pick the right test, they have to apply it appropriately, they have to interpret appropriately. So this is a very R-heavy course. Now, when I teach it to my ecology students, it's a little bit different because I'm still, R is a tool set, one of the tools in their tool set, I tell them, right? When they're in the class, you're learning skills of how to be an ecologist, field biology skills, you're learning how to identify stuff, you're learning how to ask questions, do hypotheses, you're learning all the concepts, everything we learn in ecology, right? So here I tend to pick and choose specific R packages that are useful for whatever analysis we're doing for that week's lab. And many students in this class had no experience with R programming. Some of them were downright terrified, to be honest, when they heard that's what we were going to be doing. And understandably so. I know the first time someone told me I needed to program something, I'm like, that's not why I got into this field, but and then they see what it is and they come around, most of them, eventually. So my approach is, let's talk about the question. Let's focus on the question. Why are we collecting these data? What are we trying to find? Um, what's our hypothesis? And then for this class, I typically give them the framework of the, especially for the first few labs. They kind of get the full framework, and in our notebook, here's the steps you're going to take, right? Here's the code structure, here's the comments. They get kind of get everything early on. And then they have to adjust the code to variable names, plot axes names, right? That they need to adjust at first. And that's where they, especially the ones who've never had programming before, learn about how important capitalization is or isn't, depending on their variable names, right? Capitalization matters. All these little syntax things that they may not be used to. We try to work through those issues initially. And then I scaffold the assignments. So every week, every subsequent assignment, they get one that's a little bit, I have a fewer supports in, so early ones might show them how to do a ggplot, bar graph, right? And later ones, I just tell them, you're going to have to make a graph. What kind of graph do you need? How are you going to do it, right? They'll have to figure that code out. But they have all of their old code they can go back and look at, but they'll need to adjust it. They'll need to tweak it, right? So by the end of the class, then they're getting more and more confident, right? And that's really what this is about, is building confidence in their ability to use the language. And then for my general ecology class, I have them do a presentation surrounding a topic of interest from the second half of the class. And they kind of have to focus on that topic with a data set, either a data set they collected in the field or one they found online. And they work through, the question, hypothesis, the tests they use, and they kind of teach the students a little bit about the R method that they use and what they learn from it. So by the end, they are getting something sort of similar to my biostats class, but they're really looking at one very specific question with R. So in general ecology, they're not learning everything there is to know about R basics, but they are learning how to kind of use the tool as they need it. So some of the lessons that I learned, just a few, and I'm going to give you a few more in the next slide that are highlighted in Auker and Barthelmess 2020. First things first is, if you've never done this before, give yourself and the students lots of time. The problem with teaching R, and I'm going to bring this up later, is that it's an additional skill set, right? It's going to add time to your teaching. You might have to cut something out, right? Even, if you have your students downloading the program to their computer, R and R Studio to their computer, weirdly enough, that always takes way longer than I think it's going to. They always have problems. I don't know how, but every semester I'm usually standing by one and kind of coaching them on the process. So usually the first lab, it's like, all right, let's get our studio downloaded and let's do a very basic exercise, like super basic. You don't, if you're doing this for an ecology lab and they don't have any programming experience, you do not want to start the ground. You do not want to hit the ground running too fast. You're going to lose a lot of people. Have students, one thing I have had my students do is kind of keep a log of their errors somewhere for themselves and kind of have a little, whether they do it in Google Doc, on a sheet of paper, wherever, where did they go to find the answer? And hopefully that little sheet or list is not just, hey, Dr. Auker, it's like, I went to Stack Exchange, I went to Google, I did this or I did that, because you're not going to be standing next to them holding their hand through their whole coding process, I hope, right? They need to figure out where they can find the resources to help them when, they're not in class. Another thing that I found that helps a lot is just sketching out their data visualization before they even create it. What is your graph going to look like? There is one really good book that I use, which I like a lot. I don't know if you guys use this one. It's called, ooh, sorry, my like camera does not want to pick this up. Here, let me take the blur off. It's called Getting Started with R, An Introduction for Biologists by Beckerman et al. Let me just unblur my video. There we go. There we are. So Getting Started with R, this is what I use as their kind of introductory textbook in, I believe I assign it in ecology, and I did assign it in community ecology. It kind of guides them through the process of making kind of a preliminary graph to see what their data even look like before they apply a statistical test, before they apply, do all the fancy stuff with the graph, right? So I tend to kind of have them sketch it out a little bit, even on paper, like what's your data going to look like when you try to communicate it? What kind of statistical tests will you need to analyze that data? And then keep it simple. All right. I can't emphasize that enough. Don't try to teach them everything that R can do or that you do with R for your research. If you do use it for your research, I try to get them to recognize it as a tool. This is one of many tools that they have as ecologists. And so, think about what it is you want them to learn with it. What do you want them to walk away from? And what do you want them to remember? Right. And focus on those things. And then more lessons learned. We elaborate on these in the paper a little bit, but teaching R is different from teaching statistics. It's an additional skill on top of teaching them statistics. So if you're already teaching them statistics, this is even more time you're going to need to add. So if you want to implement R into your ecology course, think about what you're going to need to trade off, and I'll get to that in a minute. One thing I wish I would have told myself the first time I did this, especially when I taught my very first class teaching R, was prepare for lots of time in writing assignments. Let me try that again. Prepare for lots of times when you write assignments and in troubleshooting. Because when I first wrote assignments, they took me forever to write and troubleshoot and get just right. I was also a little bit newer using the program, but as I got used to using it and as I realized this is going to take me a while, I also learned what resources were out there, so I made more use of those over time. And there is a trade-off between teaching R and teaching content. That's one thing that Erica and I both learned, that you're going to have to give something up. So you want to think about what it is you really want your students to know, right? How necessary is teaching R for your class, for this specific class, and what might you need to give up, or how can you implement it into your teaching? And that's a difficult question to answer, and that might be different for each curriculum and each person teaching. Speaking of curriculum, you will want to understand how your course fits in the curriculum and talk to the other people in your department who may also be using R. Now, we have a fairly small biology department, and so I'm the one who uses R, and then in our stats department, we might have one or two people. So there's not a lot of talking that goes on a little bit. I've become best friends with the stats professors at several places I've lived, and that may be something that you'll want to do as well. But you might want to think about where else might students be getting this R experience and exposure to the program, and how might you be able to complement that, and how can you complement each other rather than reinventing the wheel every time. I mentioned this before, but helping students help themselves by identifying the resources outside the classroom. And then this little QR code goes to data carpentry, if anybody's familiar with that. It's a great resource for introductory R, using R Studio, some exercises that you could give to students. I saw a few other I'm sure there's a lot of other resources we could probably even throw in the chat, I'm sure, that are going on right now in the chat. about other places where you can, you know, send students. And I haven't used it in a while, but I know that there's a package in R called Swirl, which is you can also have your students do it. It's very basic, very interactive experience. Students can have kind of working with R and understanding the basic syntax. Um, but one thing I want to mention is be flexible in your approach. You don't have to write all your exercises, but from scratch, there's tons of resources out there. Some of you might need to modify for what you're doing, right? But one place that I found some really good exercises, and this is an older book, but it's Community Ecology by Gardner. It's got analysis in R and Excel. So I've used some of these in my community ecology class. And then, of course, any of the exercises and resources that I have in the supplementary material that's been posted would also be really helpful. So I'm going to wrap this up. These are the discussion questions that I threw up here. If anybody wants to, just to kind of generate discussion and just based on just kind of seeing the chat move along. I don't think we really, it looks like there's a lot of really great discussion in there. But one thing I'm really curious about, of course, if you have questions for me, I would love to hear them. I'll do my very best. Another thing that I would ask you guys is, do you teach R or Python to undergraduates? What advice has worked for you? Or even if you haven't taught it, what would you need to get started? And I see a question here in the chat. It says, what the book title? I don't know if that's, oh, it looks like someone already got that, the Community Ecology book. That's Community Ecology by Mark Gardner. It is analytical methods using R and Excel. So there's some excellent books out there that are available. So that's all I have. And if anybody, when you look through exercises, has questions, see things in the supplementary stuff, have questions, want to pick my brain, want to share things with me, my email is here, lauker@misericordia.edu. All right. So thank you guys so much, and looking forward to our chat.
Thank you, Linda, for your presentation. That was great. I guess we'll start the Q&A with Rick. You can unmute and say your question.
Yes, you mentioned R notebooks. I'm familiar with R Markdown files. So how does a notebook differ from the Markdown files?
I'm not sure that it differs all that much. I think it's just it's an R Markdown file that's formatted maybe a little bit differently, but when you go into R Studio, you can open a new R notebook, and it's fairly it's an R Markdown file document, but it's just referred to as R notebook and in R Studio. I don't know if
Great.
that helps. Okay.
Thanks. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah. And Lionel, I guess, or I don't know who's. Yeah.
Yeah, so last year I started using Google Colab notebooks. They work similarly to R Markdown, except they're a kind of Jupyter notebook. So Jupyter notebooks, you can actually combine you can combine different programs. So things like you can combine Python and R in the same document, and you don't have to go through the trouble of downloading R packages that translate Python to R. What you do is you tell the Google Colab or Jupyter document what particular program you want to run a chunk of code in. And then once you create whatever object you did in, say, Python, you can then convert that Python object to, say, an R object in a different code chunk, and then you can tell that code chunk to run R. And that's probably not too important for somebody that's just being introduced to R for the first time, but when you start talking about things like reproducibility, then it becomes more useful if you have completely different kinds of analyses that you want to do in different programs. And then you're able to actually combine those separate analyses in a single place.
Thank you. That's really helpful to know. I haven't really used Google Colab, but I'm going to check that out. Thanks. Is it Jan?
Yeah, Jan.
Okay.
Hi all, thanks. So one question, and I see this in the chat too, I'm struggling with a little bit is the use of AI and really changing things pretty quickly. And I'm just curious how people handle that. So my own experience is that AI is a very powerful tool, and I tell students to use it. But what I see too is that people are overusing it. So at times they're not able to, like if there's a small thing, like a small error in their code, they're not able to see what's going on because they never really learned the language, right? And so one of the things I'm thinking about right now is that I will have some oral kind of like exams for the students to kind of like make sure they have the basic understanding of um, how R works and how they can use it. But I'm just curious how people deal with that because it is so like it's moving so fast and things are changing so quickly. And it's really a very powerful tool. There's no doubt about it. But there's definitely limitations, which I see when students when I see it right away. Like there's one small thing, right? And they cannot figure it out to save their lives. And so I'm just curious again, how people deal with that and that development.
Yeah, I haven't. I've only had one student ever tell me that they use AI to help them with error troubleshooting. So I'm going to open this up to anybody else. So,
I mean, I have a response to that one. Hi, Jan. I'm Brad Christopherson. I'm at UTRGV in South Texas. And so outside of the classroom, I mean, I even have like, say, master's students who come in with no experience in program. They've got their data to analyze. And um, I have some specific sets of analyses that they need to do. And as we iterate and talk about their analyses, I try to give them high-level descriptions of what to do, and they've taken a class in R as a part of their program. And I don't really have any major insights for you other than to say I see the exact same thing. Like even with students working on their research data, and they're learning as they go in terms of how to analyze it. And I do encourage them to use ChatGPT as a tool, but I have to warn them that it can be that the amount that they can get from it is in proportion to how much they understand of the code. And so if they get something and it works and it generates something, they need to go back and try and understand how it works. And just to really encourage them to do that. But I see the same thing. And I like your idea for like some oral time. So like when I have one-on-one meetings with my master's students as they're crunching through their data, we sit down and we go through their code that they've written, and I ask them to explain like, hey, what is this doing here? And they might say, oh yeah, I got that from ChatGPT. I'm like, well, like let's walk through this. What does this mean? What is it doing? We connect that. And how to do that within a classroom setting, I think is definitely going to be a challenge. I don't know, but it's definitely there, and it's changing things very quickly because a lot of these like assignments that we're going to give to students now, it can be answered with a prompt, and you can put that prompt right into ChatGPT, and it will give you the code, and you can tell it which packages to use. I mean, I use it as a tool myself as I develop code. So yeah, it's definitely tricky.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And that's why that's right now my solution is like an oral exam where like maybe get an error code and they have to tell me why it's giving me that error code, what has to be changed, or those type of things. But that's my only solution because ultimately I think they still have to understand it. And I have to admit I'm kind of like I feel lucky that I learned R before these tools were available, because I did not have a choice and I had to learn the hard way. And I think for these students now it's hard, but still feel very, like, I still think it's very important that they learn some of the fundamentals, right? Because they making mistakes clearly, and then they're not able to fix them.
My
Bob?
answer to that is that ChatGPT is free for now. What happens when they start charging for everything and people can't afford it, and then they never learned it in the first place? Because you have to remember, all these big tech companies, their goal is to make a profit. So they're offering all these free services for now to get you hooked to the paid service. And once they get to the part where they're profitable, they're going to cut off the free service.
That's certainly something to consider.
And I'm a software developer, so I have to deal with big tech all the time. So I'm not saying this, so I've seen big tech companies either drop the free stuff over the course of time and raise their prices. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. If you keep telling your students use it, just remember, one of these days it's not going to be free.
Go ahead, Robert. Your question?
Yeah. So your approach to the general ecology course is exactly what I'm trying to start doing in the field ecology class that I teach. Difference, I suppose, is that I have a very heterogeneous group of students, but most of them are really inexperienced in this. So the scaffolding is absolutely critical. And I was wondering if you have experience or have used some of the interactive elements. That Shiny, I think, is the app that lets you put code in, because I want the students, basically, they're collecting data, then they're working with comparable data sets collected by others. And so it's graphing, it's very simple summary statistics. So it's nothing terribly advanced in the statistics level. And I want them, again, focus on the content more than the technology. But at the same time, I want them to get the idea that they can learn how to do this stuff. So some basics of, okay, be not afraid of this. The same approach to GIS. Let's do simple things with GIS. And if you want to learn more, you can. So how do you approach that issue of designing those scaffolded lessons?
I like I said, the first couple of labs, I do walk them through like very hand-holdy. Like, this is how you make a graph. Let's walk through the code together. Let me show you, line by line what this stuff means, right? And then the next lab, I'm not as helpful. And so, I kind of let them run through it, make a few mistakes. And by the time, like, and saw a question like how many labs I teach. So the way I do this is for my ecology class, and this is because I had to give up teaching like a lot of stuff or going out every week. I do one lab where we go out, we get the data, we brief, we learn about, why we're going out to get the data. We have the full class, but my labs are only 3 hours long. I know some folks sometimes teach like a 4-hour lab, maybe even a 2-hour lab, but then we have time to come back, debrief, and then the next week they're working on analyzing the data. So out of that, there's like 5 or 6 like kind of complete labs where they have. So by the end, you know, I basically say, now you're on your own to create, what analysis you're going to use, what graph are you going to use. So they learn a handful of different techniques. They don't probably learn as much as I really like them to know, but I kind of remove the supports little by little throughout the semester. But speaking of Shiny, the first time I taught biostats, I did actually have my students make a Shiny app. And it went a little bit better than I thought it was going to. I was a little nervous that it would just completely fail, but they did a pretty good job. They did, it's very basic. but they were able to create a graph and be able to, the user would be able to manipulate something about that graph. And the one student who was in my class, she was struggling with it up till basically the deadline. And then we were sitting down, and I was like helping her with the code because she wasn't super confident about her skills. But then she got it to work, and she was like, and she looked at me, she goes, "I made that." And I said, "Okay, so wasn't all that worth it?" All those sleepless nights. So it is possible. Um, but the shiny apps are a good option, but they will take a little bit of extra coding to do. I don't know if that helps. Lionel, did you have more to add?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that I started teaching myself R before ChatGPT and other AIs came out. So when I was doing a new analysis that I didn't know how to do in R, usually the first place that I would look would be an internet search that took me to, say, a Stack Overflow site.
Mhm.
And basically, usually I would find at least one other person that had asked the same or a similar question, and they might provide some of their code to Stack Overflow for somebody else to provide advice on. And then whoever answered them would provide a potential solution. They would write back and indicate if the solution worked. And then I could try applying that code to my own analysis, except that I would be thinking about how the code had to be adjusted to work with my data, my predictors, my response variables. So it's not quite it's not quite like a regular AI where you provide the data, you provide the code, and it provides an answer. So it does actually still require you to think a bit about how the code would work in your analysis.
Yeah, that tends to be what my experience has been with students, before AI was as huge as it is now. I mean, Stack Overflow is definitely one of the sources they always found, and they're like, yeah, this kind of some of them had a lot of success with it, others still couldn't figure it out, and it's usually because they capitalized something and didn't see it in their code. But but yes, that is a really good source. Jeremy?
Hey folks, my name's Jeremy. I'm a graduate student at UO finishing up. I've been teaching our population ecology class for the past 4 years. I developed a lab course that kind of goes through doing mostly theoretical modeling in population ecology in R. And I started teaching kind of pre the big boom in AI, and now obviously I'm changing things up and trying to figure it all out. But something I've found that's like, to me, the pillar of what makes it work, because we have students who have no R experience, no programming experience at all. Um, what gives any like amount of structure to it is I spend a lot of time at the beginning of the course on like troubleshooting, because to me, like that's the biggest part. So like equipping students with a like a framework for troubleshooting and some guidelines for like what happens when you come up. This is, exposition and a comment, but if other folks have things to say on this, what I've been doing is I tell them like, hey, I don't want you to spend 3 hours on any one problem. Like if you're running up a hill and you hit a barrier, you can waste your entire night on something so stupid, like a missed comma or something. Don't do that. I want you to try. I want you to like have a little bit of like learning should be a little uncomfortable, but not super uncomfortable. Come talk to me after like when you know you hit that wall, come talk to me. And then when you do come talk to me, I want you to the best of your ability, write out the steps of what you're trying to code in plain English. Because more often than not, what it ends up being is not a coding problem, but they don't know what I'm asking, or they don't know what they're trying to do. They don't know what the model is. Like there's some ecology or some math thing that's an issue. And making them write it down, like on a piece of paper, step by step, here's what I want to do, I found super helpful. With AI, it's become more complicated. I've had to add some amendments of like, I totally encourage you to use it. Most of us who do data science are using it. But there's extra steps of like checking, did it work? Because I mean, like, especially with simulations, like it'll just give you some random crap that I'm like, okay, this isn't quite it, you know? So all that to say, I wonder if anyone has any other thoughts on like how they approach troubleshooting, or I've been wanting to like write a formal guide, like a document of like how to like a framework for troubleshooting. So I don't know if that exists or if others have experience with this.
Thank you, Linda, for giving such a great presentation, and thank you for everyone for participating in such a detailed discussion. We have another upcoming water cooler chat in April, which you can register on the ESA website, and it focuses on the differences between the environmental science, ecology courses through the context of the 4DD framework. So it'd be great if you want to attend another chat like that. And thank you for just participating. More 4DD resources can be found. And thank you for attending today's water cooler chat. And thank you, Linda, for giving us such a great and detailed presentation. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you so much, everyone.